One of my favourite subjects to talk about, windows. I love windows, even though they are the weakest point in terms of a building, in terms of energy and so on. They are, in my opinion, one of the most important aspects of a building. And the reason being, number one is it lets in natural sunlight, which is critical. We've gone on about it quite a bit in all the different forms of footage as building biologists. Mother Nature is our standard, and we want as much natural sunlight as possible to minimize the use of artificial lighting, and just because that's how human beings are supposed to live, in natural sunlight. The second thing is that the windows connect us to the outdoors. So yes, they're weak points with energy, and if you get too sort of tied to the energy factor of the building, you can minimize windows and therefore minimize light, minimize the connection. I love sitting inside and looking outside and connecting to the outdoors a lot, looking at the gardens and the birds and the clouds and seeing what the weather is. It's really important in a building. So because it's our weak point, in my opinion, windows is where the most amount of money and budget needs to go, because it's one of the most important factors, but our biggest weakness when it comes to energy. So there is a lot of footage in this particular segment of windows. You'll be looking at various pieces of footage. An interview with Dale Roberts from Affy Projects, who was the head of our building here on this project, Passive House Builders, and going through a make-up model of a window and discussion with him. I'm also on site comparing exactly what we took out, thin aluminium, nothing windows, with what we're replacing, and comparing the two right next to one another. And there's also discussion of me in a rental and discussing some double glazing, brand new installation of this double glazing with a aluminium frame that's not thermally broken, and there's condensation all over the frames, and discussing that in detail. So there's a lot to look forward to and a lot to learn about windows here. But I just, again, want to fill in the gaps with just some photos and some footage that isn't covered in all of that footage. So bear with me as we go through some of that discussion and some of the images. So if we look at this first image, you can see here that this is what we were dealing with before. So this is during our destructive works and demolition. This is glazing that's up against the timber piece of framing there, and you can see as soon as we removed the architrave from the inside, you can see straight through that gap to the outside, that gap in between the window frame and that piece of timber there. And the only thing between us and that was an architrave. So there's no taping that gap, no insulation in that gap, and that is a big problem in my opinion. So you can see there this a bit more of a close-up on this gap, and that was in every door and every window. This is the gap we had. So if we move on, you'll see how we sealed that gap. These gaps need to be taped. Now, back when this building was done, 6-star was not around in terms of the energy rating of houses, and taping didn't need to be done. But it now does need to be done, but you'll see in many of our segments, I go on and on about taping. The tape's incredibly important. It's why we use Seeger tapes, because they remain adhered. Those tapes start coming apart and coming off, and the glue's drying out, and that's when the problems begin again. So this is the taping on the outside. You'll see this thick black fabric type taping that is taping the frame of the window to the outside of the building to take up gaps all around that window on the outside. And you'll see that the blue is the vapor permeable membrane, but you can see the enormous amount of black tape that's a close-up that goes around the entirety of the window frame, sealing it from any air getting in between the frame and the wall. On this next photo, you'll see that before we even install the new windows, the taping is done first on the outside as well as the inside. So this is a long procedure whereby the tapes are slowly and carefully adhered to the window frame on the inside part of the frame as well as the outside part of the frame, so that when it is put in place, you can then beautifully just press that tape all around the inside and then beautifully press that tape all around the outside, and we have sealed all of the gaps. So that's what it's doing in that photograph. This is just showing that this is exaggerated. We don't need to use that many packers, but this is just showing a level where that window is going to be installed. There are little green packers under the level there, you can see. Basically, it's just a demonstration to show that if it is not exactly level, then little plastic packers are used to make that exactly level. So, but we certainly, that would have been a very bad scenario if we needed that many packers, just for demonstration only. Here on the inside shows you again when we did the taping before we install the window, how we have taped on the outside part of the frame. This is the top of the window frame. So it shows you how we've taped the outside part of the frame and the inside part of the frame. And then that is what's going to attach. As you can see there, we've lifted it up. So they have flaps on them, they're extra. We put the window in place and we lift up this tape and we tape it all up. So we have a nice sealed window unit. This was something I was amazed by in this next photograph. The screws that we used to install and adhere basically the window to the timber frame. This is on the inside in the wall cavity. So you can see the length of that screw that's going in. It's significant, and it's going to be screwed into the window frame. I've taken a photograph because I was bewildered at seeing what came out. This next photograph shows you those tiny little brad type nails are what were used to basically install our old window frames and keep them in place. You can barely see one of them. It looks like a pin. It is so tiny. And these are the size of the screws that are being used to install the new windows. Now, for me, this photograph is very powerful and says a lot. Forget about the windows. This is just what's used to hold that whole window in place in your building. So when you get wind and issues, wind coming through, those little brad nails are all that's holding that thin little aluminium framed window in place. Absolutely ridiculous. Whereas now we have solid, massive screws and a lot of them holding that window in place, and we've got tape on both sides and we've got insulation in between the gap. That window is held in nice and sturdy and steadfast and not going to move and so on. So anyway, the builders thought I was nuts taking photos of brad nails and screws down to that detail, but this is really important in my opinion. The next photo just shows how there's a gap with the new windows now. Remember, we're putting European windows in to a retro renovation, so you will have some issues in terms of gaps that you need to make up. I didn't want to use expandable foam. I just don't like that product. Very good insulator, but horrible on the environment, horrible in its chemical makeup. But here you can see we've taken pieces of the polyester insulation fiber, broken it off, and stuffed that all around those gaps before then taping the inside and the outside to take up that gap beautifully. So there you can see once we've done the insulation, or we haven't done it yet in this photo, but just showing you how easy it is then to just move the tape over and tape it to the frame to seal that gap in between. This next photo is taken in a rental where we stayed while we were doing the renovations, and there was a brand new installation of windows there. This was a new build, double glazed windows. But the aluminium frame used was not thermally broken, which means we go into detail in this in other footage, but it just means that the outside part of the frame is not physically broken and separated from the inside part of the frame. It's just a solid aluminium frame. That's what's standard. And that's what, in my opinion, is a really significant problem when you're in climates where there's a significant temperature change and it gets really cold. So we wake up in the mornings and we find that these frames are just dripping in condensation and damp. Literally looked like it was raining inside, and they're double glazed windows. So anyway, I've used this instrument, a protometer basically, which I've shined onto the window. You can see just above the window frame here, to just look at the dew point temperature. Now I'm not going to get too technical, but basically that figure of 3.7 degrees Celsius is just saying that the dew point temperature at the moment and the surface temperature of that window and just above that aluminium frame basically is 3.7 degrees Celsius below dew point temperature. What does that mean? It just means it's condensating like crazy, but what it means is that the temperature of that frame needs to increase by more than 3.7 degrees Celsius for condensation not to occur. Now, it's an ice cold aluminium frame. It's winter, it's freezing outside, and it's condensating everywhere. It's going to take quite something for it to increase by 4 degrees Celsius because it's connected to the outside, which is freezing cold. And it's just a demonstration for those who want it scientifically in terms of what the actual top of the frame, very close to the glass, is reading. When I do something similar, measure the surface temperature and compare it to dew point temperature on the window sill and going up the reveal on the inside, you can see that there it's still 2.1 degrees Celsius below the dew point. That means all of that building material on the inside, the window seal and reveal and so on, is all condensating and is damp and will support mold growth as long as it stays like that for a significant period of time, being a day or two, and it's going to happen every night. So that is that. Now I'm shining on the plasterboard wall next to the architrave on the inside. So we've moved a significant distance away from the window and the aluminium frame, and still there is a risk. You can see there in yellow, risk of condensation at 2.9 degrees Celsius. So we regard it as a risk when it's within 3 degrees Celsius. So this is just under the risk, but showing you that because it's so cold and it's wet and condensing, that is not just right on the frame, that's translating even next to the frame and even on as far as the plasterboard wall. So in my opinion, a significant problem. So let's look closely at what we've used now to replace this. Our triple glazing, you can see there are 3 pieces of glass there. You can see the timber framework that is on the inside, on the left of that photograph. And then you can see on the outside there's aluminium cladding, so that we don't have to upkeep the outside and maintain that window. That will be maintained. That is the one advantage of aluminium. But it's thermally broken because you can see that there are plastic spaces there, and you can see that there is timber all the way around, so that freezing cold aluminium is not going to transfer to the inside part of the frame. And you can see how big the air gap, now we go through this in quite great detail, but you can see how big the air gap is between the 3 pieces of glass. So we've got 2 on the outside and 1 in the middle. In terms of air gaps, the CSIRO have done a lot of research on this, and that air gap is what insulates you. It really is. I mean, yes, the thickness of the glass helps, and we go into this in detail, but try and get as big an air gap as you can afford, because that air gap is the most important thing. There's often argon gas in there, which doesn't last forever. Argon gas will dissipate, lasts around 17-20 years. You'll find, I've just got some notes here so I don't get all the numbers wrong, but between 17 and 20 years there, you will find that that's how long it will last. So eventually the argon gas will not be there, but you'll still have that air gap. But what is important is to try and get as close to 12 millimeter gap or more as you can. We have 2 gaps there. We have more than 12 millimeters there. So the thickness of the glass will sometimes also determine the gap, because if you've got 4 mil glass or 6 mil glass, that can make a difference, because then if you've got 6 mil glass, it makes a big difference with the gap. It's going to take up a few more of that gap. So anyway, without going into huge amounts of detail, the key is to try and get as big an air gap as you can, because that is what insulates you. And as I mentioned, the CSO have done a lot of research on this. You get a lot of gain up to a 12 millimeter gap. You will still get gain at 13, 14, 15, 18 millimeter gaps, but the gain is not as big. So it starts diminishing. It's diminishing returns. You still get a return, but it is diminishing after 12 mil. So try and get at least a 12 mil gap, because every bit you get over 8 and then 9 mil and 10 mil and 11 mil up to 12 mil, you're getting big jumps in insulation. So try and get that. You'll find that cheaper double glazing will have a 6 mil gap, or these much smaller gaps. We need a proper air gap there if you want it to be really effective. And triple glazing gives you obviously 2 air gaps with a piece of glass in the middle, whereas double will just give you 1 air gap between your 2 pieces of glass. So that's just a really good demonstration on that photograph as to what triple glazing is and double glazing, and how important the gaps between there are, and that there's variations in the glass as well. On the next one, I've given you this photo because you can see, if you look at the front of the photograph, the front of the glass there, those 3 pieces of glass, you can see what looks like black spaces or dark grey spaces. They're plastic, little grey spacer there. The spaces are important, and it's important that they're plastic and not aluminium, for example, metal. There are so many variables, and that's the reason why I'm going through this little bit of extra detail, which some of you may be interested in, some not. But this detail is so important, because this is where the whole glass unit will either be very well constructed or not. So those spaces are important that they're plastic, not aluminium, because aluminium has the high thermal conductivity, and you can get a lot of cold thermal bridging effect then happening again. So you want to minimize any metal within that window unit, besides the cladding on the outside, because that just allows the cold to come through from the outside, or things to escape. Aluminium or metal gets cold very quickly, and it gets hot very quickly. High thermal conductivity is a technical term, but needs to be avoided when you're trying to stop this temperature difference from affecting the inside. So that's important from there. You'll see that these, in between these pieces of glass on the double and triple glazing, it's vacuum sealed. Now that vacuum seal is very important. How good the seals are really important. So there are just, as you can see, endless variables when it comes to the construction of the whole window unit. Now, we have used passive house standard windows, so these are triple seals. So not only the seals very good, there are a decent amount of seals, and that vacuum sealed. I can tell you on a number of occasions, I have come across windows where that has been compromised. You will see, quite deceptive, you will look at the window and you will see condensation. Now, you can wipe the inside of the window and go, oh, the condensation is not happening on the inside. Good, my double glazing's working. Must be on the outside. Go around to the outside and wipe there, and you'll see, oh, that's not the outside that's condensating, or the inside. Where's this condensation occurring? And it's actually occurring inside the little window cavity. It's occurring on the outside piece of glass, but on the internal surface. So it's occurring in that air gap. Now that should not occur. That means that the window has failed. Right? This is very important, because I've seen it on quite a number of occasions, and even to the degree that I thought it was normal that it condensates in this gap and then drains away. It is not normal. The glass unit has failed. That vacuum seal has failed. There must not be any condensation in that air gap. That's not where it occurs. There must be no condensation on the glass or the frame, inside or in the gap. Everything that happens with water must be on the outside surface. And it's as simple as that. If you just remember though, that is what it must be. So let's see what we haven't covered here, the spacer, the argon gas, the seals for air tightness, very high standard when it comes to passive house. The installation, the U value of glass. Basically, when it comes to the installation, you're looking at the glass. There's a U value for just the glass. Then there's a U value for the glass and the frame together. And then there's a U value for the whole window installed. This is important. You often just hear these U values thrown around. There are different U values for different aspects of the window. And it can be very high in one, and they quote it high in there. But by the time it's actually installed in your building, it diminishes enormously. If you don't tape the window to the external membrane and to the internal membrane and get complete air tightness of the whole window unit, your U value is just going to drop significantly. So the connection between the window and the building fabric must be as well performing as the window itself, if not better. I've read that out because that's an important point that I want to mention, because you can spend all of this money on a magnificent window, and if that window is installed badly, and we're talking about the taping, and we're talking about how it's installed on the side, and we're talking about the seals, we're talking about the whole installation process being done properly. If that window is a good window on its own, but installed terribly, you've not completely, but to an extent, you have wasted a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of effort. So ensure that the glass is of a great standard, and it's why we use European glass as well, because it is filtered. The sand is filtered more. I couldn't believe it when I put up one window next to another, a European one and Australian glass here, and the Australian one actually looked like it was murky. And I was like, what's going on? We need to clean the window, clean it. And the builder said, yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? When you look at a European window, it's like it's almost not there. It is so clear. And that's because the quality of the sand is different and how it is filtered. And it makes for such a clearer glass. So the glass is so important, the thickness of the glass, the air gap between the pieces of glass, the seals that hold the whole window unit together, the spaces that are used in between the pieces of glass, the taping of the window, the thermal break, or whether it's all aluminium, or whether it's thermally broken aluminium, or it's all timber, or timber and aluminium with a break in between. All of this is important. How it's installed. Is the air gap between the window and the wall taken up properly, taped properly? All of these are variables, and if you get some of those variables wrong, the insulation will be diminished. So it's just a matter of getting it all right so that the money you spend is spent properly and the job's done properly. So that's all I want to talk about in terms of the windows in this segment, but there will be other segments following now, as I said, with interviews with Dale about windows, as well as me on site in the rental with the windows having problems, and me comparing on site on our project what we've taken out and what we've replaced with. So I hope you get a lot from that. Okay, I wanted to give you an idea today on what's the windows and the sliding doors that we are going to be taking out and what we're going to be putting in. Forget about me, I'm going to step out of the frame, but I'm just going to keep speaking and show you what we're doing here. Now, what we're taking out is this. You can barely see it because it's such a small profile. This is the window, and to give you an idea, let's look at this. This is the glass. This glass, this is all that protects you from the outside, from the freezing cold. This is all that there is. One single bit of glass, which to me is completely useless. It's like being outside, whether it's boiling hot or whether it's freezing cold. On top of that, this is the width of the frame. That's all we have. It's all aluminium, and that aluminium is as thin as that with the thermal bridge. When it's freezing outside, It's freezing inside. That freezing cold conducts very easily through this full aluminium frame. There is one single seal, as you will see, that goes around on this frame. One small black seal that goes around, and you'll have one on the other side, just holding the glass in, and that's it. Alright, let's look at what we're going to replace it with. Here is our new window, our new door frame, new sliding doors, new windows. Well, not sliding, but we've got one sliding door, but this is our new door/window. Look at the profile on that compared to what we are taking out. Here we have hardwood timber on the inside. This is going to be facing the inside of the property. We then have a seal. We then have 3 pieces of glass, triple glazing. The triple glazing, the glass is 4 mil thick and has at least a 14 mil air gap in between each one. That air gap is really important. That's a big air gap between each piece of glazing. So we've got 3 triple glazed, 3 pieces of glazing, encompassed into 2 seals, one seal here, 1 seal there, all the glass in between, argon gas in between that glass, low E treatment on the glass too, and then we have another piece of hardwood timber here on the outside, another seal, and then we have our aluminium. Our aluminium is purely put here to protect the timber. So that means we don't have to upkeep the outside. We've got aluminium on the outside, but we don't have any thermal bridge because there's a seal that completely seals off this aluminium from the timber. And so this cold aluminium cannot conduct through, but we won't have all of the horrible upkeep and oiling and so on when it comes to timber on the outside. But we've got this beautiful timber on the inside. So we actually have a full, excuse me, we actually have a full timber frame because there's hardwood timber on either side of the triple glazing. But it looks like what they call a composite frame, where there's aluminium, this aluminium piece on the outside and timber on the inside. But we actually have full timber frame with just almost a cladding, if you will, of aluminium on the outside. These windows are beautiful. I'm most excited about these windows because they are what is going to keep us warm and keep us cool in the cold months and in the very, very hot months. These are your weakest point. No matter what you do on a window, even this, triple glazing, hardwood, aluminium, it is never going to be as comfortable and as good in terms of insulation as a wall, as just a brick veneer and plasterboard wall. So that means no matter what degree you go to, it will never be as good as a wall. That is why it's your weakest point. This, in my opinion, is probably one of the best windows you can possibly buy. And this is where I think you shouldn't cut when it comes to the budget. This is where money should be spent. Cut in other areas, please don't cut in the glazing, because this is what provides the beautiful connection between inside and outside. Let's talk about windows and let's take some readings. I am in a modern built home. This house was probably built only about 3 months ago, and it was completed. And this is what we would typically find in a modern build. So let's have a look at the windows. The windows are double glazed. All right, I hear so often that yes, I've invested in double glazing, and double glazing is really important and, in my opinion, essential in our particular environment here in Torquay in Victoria because of the massive temperature differentials. However, I just want to explain how there is double glazing and there is double glazing and what you need to look at in terms of good and bad and mediocre double glazing. Double glazing simply means that there are 2 pieces of glass. All right. How thick that glass is, how big the air gap is in between, how well sealed the glazing is, what frame it is in. There are so many variables when it comes to double glazing, but all double glazing means is 2 pieces of glass, a double glaze. So please find out a lot more in terms of your double glazing. Double glazing, in terms of how thick the glass is often a standard of around 4 mil is very, very common and popular. Up to 6 mil is very good. It can go thicker and thicker and thicker. But we find that usually 4 to 6 mil is what you'd find as a standard, as an average, if you will. And then in terms of the air gap, that varies quite a bit. And that is very important. So often you'll find a 4 mil piece of glass and a 6 mil gap before you find another 4 mil piece of glass. In my opinion, you need a much bigger air gap. But of course, as your air gap gets bigger, your frame gets bigger, costs keep going up and changing depending on the thickness of the glass and the thickness, if you will, of the air gap. So typically it is a 6 mil gap, 4 mil glass, but that varies dramatically. At our property, this project that we're doing, we have 4 mil glazing, but we have a much bigger gap. I believe it's 14 or 16 mil. CSIRO have done some fantastic research in this field and found that up to 12 mil gap gives you a lot of gain in terms of insulation. As you go above 12 mil, there's always gain, but it's not as good. It starts dropping off in terms of how much gain you get. So up to 12 mil, you're getting a lot of gain in terms of the gap between the glazing. And that is what insulates you. That is what is more important as opposed to the thickness of the glass, although both are obviously important. So here we do have double glazing, but what we find a lot in new homes is that investing in double glazing, but then we find that there's a cheap extruded nothing aluminium frame. And that's the problem. When I run my finger across here, the finger is completely wet. There is condensation happening right along these frames in this particular environment. This is April here in Torquay. This is our first cold snap in terms of autumn. So winter hasn't hit yet. Pull that down. But as you pull down a blind that comes in front of this window, what you're doing is you're trapping the air behind the blind. So it will come past this frame. You are trapping this curtain, if you will, or pocket of air that is sitting between the glass and the window frame and the blind. So there is no ventilation for the entire time that you are sleeping. So let's say it's 8 hours. Some people close a little earlier, sleep for longer, shorter, but let's use 8 hours as an average. For 8 hours, you are going to have a trapped pocket of air behind here. It's not entirely trapped because obviously there'll be an air gap between the blind and the architrave going around the window, but it's a fairly stagnant pocket of air that's sitting here. Now, condensation occurs when there's a big temperature differential. That means if it's freezing cold outside and it's warm inside, condensation will always happen on the warmer side. It's as simple as that. So mold only is a problem when there is too much moisture or too much water. Mold is always related around moisture. That's it. That's why we're always looking for moisture problems. Why is there too much moisture? Whether it's in the air, whether it's a leak in building materials or drainage issues or condensation, doesn't matter. It all comes back to water and there being too much. When it's out of balance, it's elevated. When condensation occurs, there's too much water. What's happening is the water vapor in the air is condensing out of the air and onto surfaces. And that's when we get condensation. So although you have double glazing, there is no condensation on the windows, on the glass. There's nothing here because we have double glazing. And we have an air gap between the warmer side of the glass and then that air gap and then a second piece of glazing, and that's the colder side. And therefore, there is no condensation happening on here And that's the beauty of double glazing. Not only will it keep you warmer, it will prevent condensation on the glass. However, because we have what in my opinion is a bad window frame, we're still getting condensation happening. And condensation's happening all over the frame, which is down. It's mainly happening, wet as anything, it's mainly happening right on the bottom, because this is where the cold or cooler air sits more on the bottom as opposed to the top. And so this is where we're getting all the condensation down. It's not a problem, condensation, when it forms, if it dries fairly quickly. So if it dries, no problem at all, within 24 to 48 hours. The problem comes when, because that's how long mold takes to grow. Just there's a lot of variations in the types and conditions and so on, but just keep in mind 48 hours as the best average in terms of the time it will take for mold to grow. So if this stays wet for 48 hours, 2 days or more, then the risk of mold forming escalates. This is where dust often forms. Unless you're right on top of it, you'll find that dust will form here onto window frames. Dust will get into the crevices, dust will form onto the window sill, and basically mold feeds off dust. Mold on this planet is here to degrade things. We would be under leaf litter and all sorts of things if it wasn't for mold. So mold is critical. There is plenty of mold out there naturally occurring, and it's critical, like many forms of bacteria, critical to the planet. But when there's too much moisture, then mold problems occur, and there's too much mold. We need things to be in balance. Your common outdoor molds out there that we see all the time, people don't react to those, very few. The molds that people react to, and in particular the mycotoxins in the mold, are usually, unfortunately, a lot worse when it comes to the molds that grow on building materials. So indoor molds related to water damaged buildings and growing on building materials, there's the problem. So this is why I'm going on about the condensation, because in my opinion this is critically important. A lot of mold problems in homes happen because of glass, and in particular because of the window frame. So the window as a whole. You may have got the glass right in terms of doing some double glazing, fantastic. But the window frame being aluminium means that there's a thermal bridge between the outside freezing cold part of this frame and the inside much warmer side of this frame. And that, as simple as that is where all the problems lie. That, what we call a thermal bridge, simply means that the freezing cold part of the frame outside transfers easily to the inside, and it condensates on the inside. I see this in hotels, in many different applications, but particularly in homes. And that's because aluminium, in my opinion, full aluminium frames are always going to have that problem. You do get what they call thermally broken frames, which just means that there's a break. In the middle of this window frame, there'll be a break so that the freezing cold outside part of the frame is disconnected and broken from the inside part of the frame. So you can have a rubbish frame, you can have rubbish seals, you can have rubbish glass, you can have a rubbish gap in between the glazing, you can have the whole window frame very poorly installed, and or any of these things happening at once. And that's where the problems come in. Please, glazing is so important. Don't cut any corners on the glazing. This is what makes people freezing cold. I can see on the internet there have been many inquiries, many questions. It's freezing cold. I've got a newborn baby. I have young kids. It is freezing. How do I stop the freezing cold from coming in the windows? I've seen people put on bubble wrap and get tape and start taping up gaps in between them. Ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous what we are doing when we are paying very good money in rent and buying new houses and having rubbish windows installed in climates like this, where there is a very big problem with temperature changes and therefore condensation. These will become mold sources windows. Please, if there's one thing you take in, realize that in the glazing, all of your windows and your doors will become the sources of mold, because the outside coldness and the inside warmth are meeting and it's condensating all over this. You will get mold growing on the inside of those blinds. And if there's one thing you also take out of this, is you do not have to see a prolific amount of mold and mold growing visibly for mold to be a problem. That is really important. For me, approximately 80% of the time, when I find mold is a significant problem in a property, you cannot see any visible growth whatsoever. But we swab that surface. When I can't tell you how many window sills I've swabbed, how many tops of window frames I have swabbed, where you cannot see any mold. They go off to a laboratory, they put that swab under a microscope, and they then send us a report on all the different kinds of molds and the concentration levels of each. And it is high. These windows are a source of mold, if this is what happens. What can make it even worse is the heating. So this is a wonderful form of heat. Hydronic heating is a radiant heat. It means that the panel is heated up. In this particular case, it's hot water via gas, but it could be an electric panel. If you're basically heating a panel and heat is radiating off the panel, it's a much healthier form of heat than ducted heating, blowing rubbish all around and creating hot drafts. However, this heat is sitting right under the window. So why should that be a big deal? Well, if you're going to create a lot of heat from here, and you're going to basically heat this window and these frames, yes, it helps because it's dry. It's going to, dry heating will naturally dry out the air, which is great in terms of condensation because we're trying to get rid of moisture. However, the heat is also going to warm the window frame and windowsill, therefore increasing the temperature differential between the indoor part of the frame and the outdoor part of the frame. So now there's an even bigger temperature difference between indoors and outdoors. So what does that mean? It means even more condensation. The bigger the temperature difference between inside and outside in the building material, the more condensation will happen on that material on the warmer side. I hope that all makes sense. But these are the problems. We don't find it in areas where they're maybe not bedrooms. So you go, well, how come it only happens in the bedrooms, not anywhere else? When you're in a bedroom, you're in a smaller space. You are lying there and breathing out water vapor for 8 hours. You are also making it much warmer. Walk into another room, it's freezing cold. Come into the bedroom because you have people sleeping in there, or a person sleeping in there. They're introducing water vapor by breathing it out, and they are warming up the room and making it a lot warmer in that room. And both of those things will add to the fact of condensation occurring on these cold building materials, particularly if you shut a blind down and have that blind completely cut off with this pocket of air unventilated, and if you're even going to increase the temperature even more, and the difference between inside and outside temperature then is going to be even greater. This is what's happening in not every home, but just about every home. This exact problem. It's why I've spent so much time in this particular piece of footage in explaining this, because it is so important. We will look at thermal images where you will see how cold the frame is in comparison. It's the easiest way to demonstrate it. Not give you actual temperatures and all the rest of it, but show you via color on a thermal camera how incredibly detrimental these window frames and this glazing setup is. Please, Australian manufacturing, produce better quality glazing. Please demand better quality from manufacturers so that they can produce it, so there is the demand, so the costs can come down. They're prohibitively expensive and ridiculous at the moment. We have to go overseas to get a better and cheaper product, and that's devastating. We should be getting better and cheaper product right here locally, not going overseas. But that will only happen when we demand it, and there's a large amount that is made, and the economies of scale can bring the costs down. So please demand it. So we're going to talk about windows today. Very complex issue, but in my opinion, where much more money must be spent, where it's not spent. This is often where it's cut. We all want the blingy bench tops and not everything on the windows, but from living now in a passive house that you've built for us, money has to be spent in windows and frames.
Yeah.
So my biggest issue that I've found in going into homes and finding mold and condensation and thermal discomfort and so on, it's coming from the windows. And even when people have invested into double glazing, we've found that it's just raining water around the frames, not being thermally broken and being just standard aluminium frame. Mm-hmm. So why is it that I feel so unbelievably comfortable in the building that you've now done for us compared to what it was where we took out your standard thin single glaze aluminium frame and talk through what we've put in and why there's such a difference now?
Yeah, well, I mean, essentially, Raf, like what you have in your house now is a window with a U value in the range of kind of 1 to 1.2. It's a bit technical, but there's different ways of measuring U values. Europeans do it differently to Americans, and we kind of follow the American system here. So your window in Europe is rated as having a U value of about 0.76.
And for the layman, what does a U value mean? Why do we want it so low?
Yeah, so a U value is essentially just the heat loss through an element.
Okay.
So you obviously want to reduce the amount of heat that you are losing through the fabric of your building in the wintertime, and you want to reduce the amount that you're gaining through the fabric in the summertime, obviously. So we're trying to create an equilibrium there and find a happy midpoint of which will ideally give the user approximately 19 to 21 degrees day in, day out, year round, without using absorbent amount of energy. So the way we do it currently in Australia is we don't really think about the fabric too much, and passive house is often referred to as a fabric first approach. So it's get the building fabric right, and then worry about the small amount of energy that is required to either heat or cool the building. Bring that in later on, but get the fabric right first. We do pretty much the exact opposite in Australia. So we don't think about the fabric at all, and we just worry about how much heating and cooling do we need to make it 20 degrees or 21 degrees. Generally that results in 10, 15, 20, 30 kilowatt heating and cooling systems, whereas in passive house, like in your house, you can usually get away with somewhere in the range of 2 to 5 kilowatts. So in the Australian context. So it's a major difference. Energy savings, energy consumption reduction of anywhere from 55 to 95%, depending on what you're comparing. But in terms of the windows themselves, so you get essentially what you've done in your house is go from a cheap, poorly manufactured aluminium single glaze window, which would have an approximate U value of around 5, something like that, 4.5, 5, might even be more, 6, to a window that has a really high performing U value of in the range of 1, essentially. So you've improved the performance of your windows out of sight, and in a building like yours that had quite a lot of windows, quite a lot of surface area of glass versus the fabric, it's made a massive amount of difference. It's probably made 80% of the difference of the performance of your overall house, really. It's critical.
Absolutely. And I've just found that instead of, as you alluded to, instead of not concentrating on the fabric, what that actually means, in exactly how you said it, but in real terms, what that means is you're getting massive power bills, everyone nervous in winter for their big fat gas bill, electricity bill, and thermal discomfort. ducted heating systems blowing hot air all over the place and dust and rubbish and hot drafts, causing illness.
Drying skin, causing rashes,
Exactly, and the second you turn it off, you're freezing because it hasn't hit any objects and so on. But that's what it means, and that's why more money has to be spent here. In terms of, we've now gone to triple glazing, but that's only because there wasn't a big difference between double and triple glazing in the price in Europe, because as you explained it, you know, they do triple glazing as a norm, and to change everything over is a lot more hassle. The cost of an extra piece of glass was not that significant. I think it made a $2,000 difference over the entire replacement of every window and door.
Yeah, that's right,
And interesting that you mentioned that no matter how you do your glass, triple glazed or whatever, it's never going to be as well performing as just a standard brick veneer plasterboard wall.
That's right,
That really struck me as amazing. I thought, no, triple glazing, all this stuff, this is going to be better, and it's still not better than a wall. So can you even have an overkill? I don't know, I don't think so.
No, well, not really. I mean, if you were talking about tens of thousands of dollars of difference between double glaze and triple glaze, then in our climate zone, we live in a relatively temperate climate zone, you would definitely entertain that and consider it. As you said, your windows are manufactured by a German company. Their standard is triple glazing, so for them to change their manufacturing procedure back to double glazing, there's not really an advantage there, and so there isn't a huge cost saving in doing that. Probably the cost of the material for the extra pane of glass, that's about it really. And at the end of the day, a U value, an R value, so the thermal resistance of a building element or a building envelope is the inverse of the U value. And so when you've got a window that's got a U value of, say, approximately 1, you've got an R value of approximately 1. As we know, a standard brick veneer wall in any volume builder house in Australia has an R value of, you know, somewhere in the range of 1.5 to 2.5.
Yeah, right.
So you're still not getting anywhere near the performance out of a triple glazed window that you are of a conventional volume builder wall fabric. So anytime you put a window in a wall, you're putting a big hole in your wall essentially, and you're losing energy or you're gaining energy. So why not do it as best you possibly can and get the most performance out of that element?
Because your comfort will be better, and this is what people go, why must I put money into it? You will be so, I'm telling you now from experience, you'll be so unbelievably comfortable and realise what you've been living in before, and your bills just plummet. So year after year after year, you're not using the same amount of energy to heat and cool, and your bills are so much lower. That's why you've put the money in. So please put the money into it.
And it's not just you, Raf, like it's like anecdotal evidence of that is we've got some other clients that I was visiting last week up in Melbourne. They've just been in their new passive house for just over 12 months, and their energy bill for that 12 months was $200. And they turned their heater on twice over the winter, and the house never got below 19.5 degrees for the whole year. So it definitely works. Yes, you have to outlay more initially, as you found out, and there's more capital upfront costs. But over the life of the building, you will recoup that money, and you'll be so much happier as you've experienced.
Exactly right. That's exactly how it's explained. So, in terms of the technicalities, when we're looking at glass, when we've got triple glazing, the thickness of the glass, does that make a big difference? What thickness should we be looking at as a minimum or maximum? It varies in size of the glass and so on.
Yeah, so the default is essentially 4mm glass, 4mm float glass, and then that varies depending on building regulations. So that may need to go to toughened glass, like if you're in wet areas, or if you're, have high fall protection issues or something like that. And it will vary depending on the area of the glass too. So the size of the pane of the glass obviously has forces on it. So once you get to a certain area of glass, you have to step up into the next thickness of glass, which would generally be 6mm, or then it could go up to 8mm or 10mm or 12mm.
So the bigger the area, the thicker the glass.
Absolutely, yeah. And the offset of that is that if you are making the panes of glass thicker, so quite often in today's architectural buildings, a 6mm glass is quite standard because a 2.4 by 2.4 window is a fairly common sized window, and at that sort of scale of glass, 6mm toughened glass, because you need for human impact safety toughened glass as well. So 6mm is quite a toughened glass. 6mm is quite a common thickness of glass. Where that potentially provides a reduction in the performance of the window is if your overall insulated glass unit has to become smaller, so the cavities within the glass panes have to become smaller to account for thicker panes of glass.
So if you're, sorry to interrupt you, but if you had to put an importance level, if you will, on the thickness of the glass and the air gap in a double or triple glazed window, it's the air gap more that gives you the insulation than the thickness.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.